welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. I apologize in advance for any bird sounds or music you might hear. I am in Nicaragua right now and the birds are kind of crazy. But anyways, today I wanted to film my June reading wrap up. So I read about 5 or 6 books this month. I actually haven't counted. I read 2 physical books. I read some books on my Kindle. So I have 2 5-star reads, 1 book that I DNF'd, and a lot to get through. So let's just get started. So as always, I'm going to tell you guys the books that I read. I'm going to give you a little synopsis and my review and opinion of them and how I rated them. So let's get into it. So the first book that I read this month is called Fresh Water for Flowers by Valérie Perrine. And this was actually in my free little library book haul video. I'll link it up in the cards and also in the description below. This book, I've actually never heard of it before picking it up, but I am so glad that I did. So this book is basically about this woman named Violette Toussaint, who is a caretaker at a cemetery. And it's in a pretty small town. She's been at the cemetery for over 20 years, I think. And she basically just has a really calm, chill, quiet life. She has the same routine every day. She takes care of the cemetery. One day, Violette's routine is disrupted by this man called Julian, who's actually the local police chief. He comes and tells her that he wants to spread his mother's ashes on somebody's grave, and Violette has to kind of figure out why. And so Violette and Julian kind of get to know each other. This book is actually quite long. It is, I think, over 400 pages. Yeah, it's about 476 pages long. The chapters alternate between the past and the present. So in the present, Violette is working in the cemetery and is basically just saying all the goings on of the cemetery and how her life is going. And then it alternates between the past, how she grew up, how she met her husband, and how her husband kind of left her and they separated and the fallings out of that. The chapters also alternate between the past, where Julian tells Violette about how his mother met the man that she wanted her ashes to be scattered on his grave. So throughout this book, you find out how Violette came to be a cemetery keeper and basically how she grew up. And I really enjoyed how the chapters kind of intertwine between the past and the present, and you slowly figure things out as the chapters go on. This book was pretty slow paced. It took me a while to get through. I think the only reason why I got through it all in just a couple days is because we were on the road a lot. So when we first started traveling, I read this book pretty much every day in the car for maybe 4 or 5 days for a couple hours a day, and I got through it. But if I wasn't traveling, I might have put this book down because it was pretty slow paced. So if you like a character-driven book, you will like this because there's not much that goes on in the plot besides figuring out the characters' pasts and how everything kind of intertwines. It was just a really good book overall, and I give it 3.5 stars. So maybe a little bit, like, it was a good book, but it wasn't 5-star worthy for me just because of the pacing and how slow it was. And I usually enjoy a plot-driven book more than character-driven. The next book that I read was Where the Crawdad Sing by Delia Owens, and I was so excited to get to this because it was so hyped up. This is becoming a movie actually at the end of July, I believe, and it was part of Reese's book club. It got such high praise and I really wanted to read it. I heard mixed reviews about it. I heard that a lot of people couldn't get into it because the first half was really slow and it was kind of set in the early 90s and it wasn't very easy to get through, but I actually found the opposite. I really like this book. This book is about this girl named Kaya, who is basically labeled as the marsh girl by locals. She lives in the marsh. She has been there for many, many years on her own, and she basically lives in the wilderness taking care of herself. So this book basically tells the story of Kaya and how she grew up, why she's alone, why she's living in the marsh. And it's a really beautiful story, honestly. You see how she is so connected to nature, how she fends for herself, how she is so resilient and keen to learn things and do things on her own, even though the whole entire world has given up on her. In late 1969, this local named Chase Andrews ends up getting murdered, and the locals immediately suspect Kaya for killing him. Part of this book is about how she grows up, how she goes from being, I think, 9 years old she was from when she was alone all the way until a young adult. Then the other part of this book, about the last third, is about how Everyone suspects that she killed Chase Andrews, and there's kind of a murder trial. It's kind of like a murder mystery at the end. You have to see, did she actually kill him, or are the people just being really biased towards her? Also stated on the back of this book, this is not a spoiler, she comes into contact with two young men from town, and it's kind of two intertwining little love stories that she has with them, and they were just so beautiful. I found that I did not agree with the people who said they couldn't get into this book. I got into it from the second or third page. It immediately gripped me, maybe just because I like stories about survival and character growth and development, and this book was all of that and more. If this book didn't intrigue you from the first third, trust me, push through it. It will get so much better. This book honestly had me speechless when I was done reading it. I couldn't read anything else for a couple days after. It was just so good. I was speechless. It was done so well. This book was just astonishing, and I really had no words. I really loved it. If you couldn't guess already, I give this one 5 out of 5 stars, and I cannot wait until the movie comes out. The movie looks great, but I honestly don't think that it's gonna do this book justice. This book was just so good, and I don't know how anything can top this. I would honestly recommend this book to everyone. So the next book that I read is Chef's Kiss by TJ Alexander. I read this one on my Kindle, and actually all the other books I've read this month were on my Kindle, so I'm just gonna put pictures up here of the cover. I haven't heard anyone talk about this book. I just saw it on Goodreads, and I immediately wanted to read it. It's called Chef's Kiss. The protagonist is a pastry chef and a food writer. The book is set in a pastry kitchen, and the main character is a pastry chef and food writer, and it just intrigued me so much because that's what I love to do. I love to bake, pastry, anything to do with that. I've been a pastry chef, I'm a writer, and I honestly just like immediately connected with the main character. This is a love story, but it doesn't quite present itself as a love story until maybe halfway through the book. So it's half of a love story, half not. So let me explain to you what it's about. So the main character, Simone, works at a magazine called The Discerning Chef, and she's a pastry chef. She writes recipes for the magazine. One day her work is interrupted by the boss calling her, telling her that the magazine isn't making any more money, and that she has to kind of change her role around and do things that are way outside her comfort zone that she doesn't want to do. They had plans to change the whole entire structure of the workplace, and she was not down for that. With the structural changes came new staff, and Simone ended up meeting Ray, who is the test kitchen manager. And at first they don't get along at all. They don't like each other. It's kind of basically an enemies to lovers, but not exactly. She has to learn how to live with and work with Ray, and eventually they get to know each other and they kind of fall in love. But there is a lot more to this story that the synopsis doesn't give you. I really love the setting and the story, but it took a very different turn than I thought it would. It actually ended up being a LGBTQ plus romance story, and there were a lot of elements, and there was a lot of representation around that, which I really liked. If you're looking for a story about LGBTQ representation, this is definitely the book for you. There was a lot of representation there, which was awesome. I didn't see the story going that way, but I kind of like that I did. Half the story is kind of the love story and Ray and Simone getting to know each other. Half of it is about Ray going through some struggles related to personal stuff. Since I didn't know that it was going to be LGBTQ plus focused, it wasn't my favorite story. I was kind of caught off guard because there was nothing in the synopsis that told me about that. I wish it did, but I mean, maybe the author did it that way so that people could read it and not get turned off by that, but I don't know why they would anyways. I really liked that the whole story wasn't just a romance. It wasn't one of your typical romance stories that follows a specific plot structure. I love that I went outside of that. It was kind of a slow burn romance. I really loved the setting. They were writing about food, they were making pastries, they were making YouTube videos, all of those things I love to do, and I could see myself in a little bit of the characters, and I really liked that. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. This book has been all over BookTube, TikTok, whatever. This is a pretty popular book right now. It is the only nonfiction book that I read this month, and I am so glad that I read this book. I really liked it. I saw a few of my favorite YouTubers reading this, in particular Rachel Catherine. I will link her channel down below. She's a great booktuber and she also does vlogs. She read this book and I'm not entirely sure what her rating was on it, but I think I liked it more than her. But I saw that she was reading it and it looked really interesting, so I decided to pick it up. This book is called Everything I Know About Love, and it's partly a memoir, partly entertainment. It's not meant to be read if you're looking for advice. It doesn't tell you, you know what, this is what you should do when you're in your 20s. This is what a good relationship looks like. No, it's not. It basically follows Dolly's journey through, I think from when she was 18 or 19, when she was in college, and growing up at every stage in her 20s all the way until 29. Everything that she learned about love and relationships and herself, and you really just see her self-growth and her mindset change throughout the years, which I really loved. And one thing I loved about this book was that at the beginning of every section, there was a part that said, everything I know about love at age 20, everything I know about love at age 25. You really get to see how her mindset changed and her worldviews and basically how she came to be who she is today. And I found it really, really, really entertaining. I loved this book so much. I kind of went into it expecting advice, but you know, I'm kind of glad I didn't. I'm kind of glad with the story that came out of it. It was a really beautiful story of transformation about Dolly learning to accept herself and love herself and feel okay being alone. She really went from being someone who couldn't be alone, always was partying, and always needed external validation, to being someone who was just completely okay by herself. This is not a book to read if you're looking for some advice. I feel like you'll particularly like it if you're in your 20s, maybe your early 20s. I'm 21, almost 22, and I really love this book. This didn't only touch on love relationships with men or romantic relationships. It touched on long-term platonic relationships with women. And you know, just sometimes friendship is the best thing that can happen to you, and just being there for your very best girlfriends is all you need. I read this book in only 2 days and I was hooked from the beginning. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars. It was so good. The next book that I read was Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. Yes, the same author. I think this was her first fiction book, and then Everything I Know About Love is her nonfiction book. I just have a thing when I really love a book that I want to read everything else the author wrote. So I decided to pick this one up. This is about a woman named Nina who's in her early 30s, and she hasn't really had any luck with dating or relationships. She's had one long-term boyfriend in the past, but she finds herself being constantly single and kind of unhappy with where she's at in her life and her relationships. One day she decides to download a dating app, and on there she meets this guy named Max. He's handsome, he's smart, he's perfect. He's everything that she's looking for. So she ends up going on a date with him, and they kind of end up falling in love. At first, it seems like the absolute perfect love story. Lots of things end up happening with that relationship with Max and her, and she really just goes through a period of transformation, just like Dolly did in her other book. I feel like the character Nina is really based on Dolly and her life and her feelings, because I found so many similarities between the two books. It follows Nina as she's in her early 30s and how kind of her friendships and relationships are changing around her. Her friends are all getting married, they're moving on with their lives, friendships are becoming more strained, and her dad actually has dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, and you really just see her struggles with that, her coming to accept that, and how she's dealing with pretty much everything in her life. This book was kind of just average for me, maybe a little bit more than average. It wasn't really anything spectacular. I went into it not knowing anything about this book. I just really loved Everything I Know About Love, so I wanted to read Ghosts. But I think that's my problem. I think that I read too many books by the same author in a short time frame that I don't end up liking the other books. I should have given it more time because it was just average. One thing I particularly liked about this book was the representation of Nina's dad, who has dementia or Alzheimer's, and how her and her mom are coming to terms with it and trying to figure out what to do, because as the months go by, his condition gets worse. Firsthand, I have experience with close family members who have had Alzheimer's or dementia and have actually passed away from it, and I have seen their decline. So this was very well represented in this book. It was a good book, but I just think I read it too close to her other book. That's why I didn't like it that much. So I give this one 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read, or actually didn't quite finish, was The Circus Train by Amita Parikh. I DNF'd this book at about 50 or 40% of the way through because it didn't turn out to be a story like what I was expecting. This book is about this girl named Lena who grows up in a circus setting. So she basically grows up on this circus train, which is run by a guy who has a bunch of different magicians and contortionists and jugglers and like everything you can think of to do with the circus. And every year the circus makes a tour around the world on a train. Lena and her dad live on the circus train. Lena is in a wheelchair, so she's actually not part of the circus performers. So she feels like a little bit of an outcast. She doesn't really fit in with everyone else there just because she's different. One day she meets Alexander, who actually just stumbles upon the train and gets caught stealing some food. The setting of this book spans across 2 decades, it says, and it's basically set in the World War II setting. So you see what happens as a result of the war and how the train is affected, how everyone is affected. Alexander, the boy that Lena meets on the train, he's basically on the run from the Nazis, and you see all of that and more, and kind of Lena and Alexander kind of form a relationship. I only read half of this book, so I'm not too sure what the rest of it is about. I picked up this book because my absolute favorite book of all time is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I loved it so much, and I wanted to pick up another book that was kind of circus related. I don't know why, but I really love books set in the circus setting, and I actually saw The Circus Train in a bookstore. I just wanted to pick it up and see what I thought. But I DNF'd this book at 50% because I just didn't really like where the story was going. Maybe I didn't give it enough time, but I don't know. I feel like this is more a young adult book. The main characters, Lena and Alexander, are I think 13, 14, or 15 when they meet, and I don't know if they actually grow up throughout the book, but that's how old they are in the first half of it. It's about this young adult trying to fit in with her friends and how she's different at the circus and how she meets Alexander and how they kind of fall for each other. I didn't really like it. Like, it started to pick up almost halfway through, so I feel like maybe it will get more interesting, but I just wasn't really in the mood for it, so that's why I stopped reading it. I also stopped reading it because it didn't really focus on the circus that much. That's what I really wanted from this book. I wanted to see like a love story in the circus setting, or not even a love story, just a story in the circus setting, but I didn't get that. The circus was merely a backdrop to Lena's growing up. That's what I wrote, and that's how I feel about it. If you want a coming of age story set in the World War II setting, then you might like this book, but I just don't think that it was for me. So those were all the books that I read this month. Let me know what you thought of this video, and let me know what were your top reads this month. I'm always interested to see what other people are reading, and I'm always looking for recommendations. If you think that you know a book that I would like, definitely leave a comment down below and let me know. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos like this, and click that bell icon to get notified every time I post a video. Also, let me know what you think of these style of videos. Do you like these reading wrap-ups? Kind of trying to get to know you guys and what content you want from me. So if you like these videos, or if you don't, let me know. I would love to hear your feedback. All right, guys, I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.